exciting. It's my first Zoom class. So that I'm a newbie to that part. So if I may have questions as we go along. But when I talked to Genevieve originally about teaching a class on something in the local area that I think is growing and we're interested in, I mean, there were so many topics to choose, but edible flowers is definitely one of my biggest passions. And I think, yeah, we found that we both were quite interested in it. So we figured that others were as well. So slow me down, ask questions in the chat. Genevieve is going to help me sort of follow questions as they come up, and we'll pause if you have any. And I will have some resources and other places you can definitely go for more information after as well. So welcome to Edible Flowers with Coderre Flower Farm. That's me. I'm Amber Coderre, and I'm a local. I grew up here. I grew up in the Hat and Redcliffe, and had family out here in Irvine, so very local area. And then grew up and moved out to the coast, where a lot of my experience in gardening is in the coast. And north of 60, my husband's from the Yukon, so we grew gardens in the north as well. So when I came home, there was a whole heat factor to work on from the prairie here that I think many of us gardeners are familiar with. So if you have any questions on growing flowers, I'm going to cover a little bit of it, but I think it's a whole separate class. This one will focus on, well, here we go, ground to cover. So I wanted to talk a bit about the history of flowers as food, as beyond just the enjoyable visual aspect of flowers that we love, and relaxing gardens for meditation and that type of thing. We are going to move into sort of where they became the bound food and medicine for a lot of people over history. And why flowers? I mean, a lot of people ask me with that eyebrow up, why are you eating flowers? What's wrong with you? And there are some really amazing, valid nutritional reasons to eat flowers. And how to not die is the biggest question I get asked regularly, is about the safety of flowers and the safety of preparing your flowers. What is the best way to do that to eat, especially for businesses that are serving to the public, like cafes and restaurants, working with health inspectors, that type of thing. And oh, too fast, sorry. And flowers in the kitchen. I just wanted to cover a couple really interesting things to try, and some thoughts on preparing flowers to eat and some of the best practices, because there are some special considerations to use them as food versus vegetables or fruit. So if I'm going too fast, Genevieve, wave at me, because I can get, if I'm going too quickly, I get talking too fast, and sometimes it's hard to slow down. So flowers as food. Flowers are a really interesting thing when you start studying botany and plants. I'm by no means a botanist by profession, but definitely amateur. And when you look at flowers in the course of the plant world, they're actually fairly young. They've only been around, which sounds kind of ridiculous, for 175 million years. But when you look at paleontology and the Earth as a whole and its age, that's very, very short period of time. There are a few plants like skunk cabbage and some of the carnivorous plants that are older than 175 million years. They're in fossils from a long time ago, but the majority of what we're talking about today for plant flowers is going to be that younger batch. And when you think about the gardening world that so many of us enjoy living in, a lot of it is based on a fairly cutthroat evolution. So, you know, what is causing the plants to develop flowers evolutionarily is a really interesting kind of sidebar that you can get into. But Earth as itself is actually a planet of flowers. There's a little nod to science fiction geeks out there. And what I wanted to talk about was the siren song of plants and why flowers are relevant. So flowers, we're learning a lot more now that we're starting to study water. The Japanese are studying water imprinting and infrared levels. Flowers are more than just about color. We used to think, and you see it in old Roman writings or some of the old herbals, that, you know, people noticed these bright colors were attracting bees and pollinators. And so, you know, therefore they got humans' attention based on the animals' attention to these things. And so when you think about, oh, Sorry, did I lose my whole slideshow? Did anyone else lose it? Because I don't have it.
I'm still seeing it, Amber.
Awesome. Sorry, just one sec, folks. It's closed on my computer. I didn't know where I was. There we go. Okay, I got it. You know, when you think about it, when you're born, you grow and reproduce and die in one season, as many annual plants do, not the perennials, but the annuals. There's a lot of reproductive pressure to make those seeds and have them carry on the genetic information. So when you look at just the science and the botany of why flowers form, it's to attract those pollinators. We're starting to realize now that it's not as much about scent and color as it is about infrared. Insects are measuring or able to measure infrared signals from flowers and certain parts of plants, for some of the insects, for kilometers away. So it's starting to become clearer as to why, for example, a bee colony will go, you know, 4 fields over to find mint, where in fact they have access to, you know, a whole field of clover right in front of them. So it's you know, it's an interesting time in plant science. But as far as food goes for us as humans, I mean, I think that I grew up being told we don't eat flowers, but in fact, history has all peoples from all over the world using flowers. They would watch the animals eat them or not eat them, and sometimes that was a successful measure of whether they were edible or not. Sometimes it wasn't. But some examples are winemaking in China. They use a chrysanthemum is not like the mum hybrid that you see at Superstore. It's chrysanthemums called Tong Ho, and it's I'm going to grow it this year for the first time. I managed to get some seeds, and it looks like kind of a bright marigold, and it's got a tart kind of acidic flavor to it, and they used it for winemaking. So this will be the first year that Coderre Flower Farm, so hopefully have that to offer. But food coloring, a lot of folks are familiar with Roman with calendula, and the Romans were one of the first peoples to use that, because saffron from the crocuses, you know, those little crocuses that grow on the hills in the spring, that center little red piece was so coveted for medicine that in order to, you know, use as food coloring, they crush calendula leaves and use them for that type of thing. Tea and spices. One of the most, I also practice herbalism, and one of the most amazing ethnobotany plants is what's called bee balm by European folks, but in fact the First Nations tend to call it sweet leaf for the translation of it, and it looks like I've got some pictures of it. It's a type of monarda. It looks like a wild bee balm. Africa, most people don't really realize that carnations actually came from Africa. They were a native plant in the kind of Congo area. And they were imported to France with the colonization, and then the French became quite attached to the sort of clovey flavor of carnations, and so originally they were from Africa. And nasturtiums, that I think all of us are familiar with, or many of us anyways, love, are native to South America, and they were used to add a mild heat and bite to food, especially the seed pods. I don't know if anybody else has eaten the seed pods. I snack on them. They're really spicy. They're kind of like the poor man's horseradish, and you can pickle them and things like that. So our ancient peoples were much more familiar with plants in general. I think there was a different type of relationship with them at that time based on just the need for it. But we progressed into more of an industrial culture with our food. And what came out of that was, during the Victorian era, the language of flowers, which is not just about those posies and things that, you know, family members gave or suitors gave for communicating language, but they also became part of our sort of it was at a time when psychology was blooming at the same time as this sort of language of flowers. I don't know if anybody out there is familiar with Freud and the schools in medical schools in Austria. I can get fairly digressive, sorry, into the history of Vienna's medical school. But what happened is the discussion of that person's a very rose person, or that person's a very, you know, they began to associate personality characteristics with psychologies like the bitter, you know, radish bite or type of thing. So it furthered our knowledge of where flower, it opened the door for flower essences, which is a different type of medicine. and consuming flowers, but it was a big part of that. They also began to use flowers on an industrial level to candy them. There were a number of, especially based out of London, there were a number of British companies that began to produce en masse candied blossoms. At the time, they used an egg whitewash, which of course, health inspecting now and food safety wise, we realized that raw egg became a challenge, but we have other means of candying our blossoms now, although I still use egg whitewash and it never been sick from it. But again, a lot of that is refrigeration. Moving into the Victorian era and past it, so that would be, kind of post 1850, early 1900s, there wasn't a lot going on until like about the 1920s when Dr. Bach began to look at flowers as medicine. And it began to move beyond food into recognizing that there are energetic levels of consuming flowers, and that flowers offer something for our spirit that I think we lack in a lot of our industrialized en masse food. So there's a really nutshell history, but why do you eat flowers? Well, I know I can only speak for myself. I eat flowers based on the nutrition. They're highly nutritious. They're concentrated. I mean, you've got the whole plant concentrating all of its energy into that top bit of reproductive organs of the flower and the seed pods. So you look at something like nettle, which we know is very nutritious as far as a plant goes. But the nettle seed pods are even more nutritious in a different way. There's a concentration of energy there that is very good for our health. So again, I think that, sorry about this, folks. There we go. I think nutrition is a big factor in that. Feeding the soul is an entirely different class. We get into, do we love our food? Does our food make us feel good? We know that if food is prepared with a loving intention and that we enjoy preparing it and we're not just eating on the go and we're not just distractedly eating, we know that there's actually a measurable wavelength energy difference, without getting into too much vibrational medicine, but we know that you can measure food when it's prepared with that thoughtfulness and it's more enjoyable. So feeding the soul is a big part of eating flowers. And I don't really know anyone who hasn't gotten a kick out of just the oddity of putting a flower in their mouth. I remember when I first, this is an aside, it's not in the slides, when I first met my husband and my stepson, they weren't really sure what to do with my gardening at the time. And we walked into a restaurant in Vancouver and they had a huge, beautiful hibiscus tree. And I asked the server if I could have a flower. And she said, yeah, sure. She's thinking I'm going to just keep it or whatever. But I sat down at the table and I ate it. And my son was about 11 at the time. And he just, like, this was so strange and bizarre. Like, he couldn't, it was such a different activity. But I mean, I think we all enjoy some of those oddities. So nutritional density, I have to give a shout out to, there's a few major farms in England and the UK that are dealing with measuring and beginning to measure nutritional values of blossoms, and are one of them is Maddox Organics Farm, and the other is Bumblebee Farms out of Ireland. They are selling just huge amounts of edible flowers to, I mean, I think they supplied the James Bond Spectre movie release with all these edible flowers at when that happened at a big, red carpet event. So these farms are moving forward with measuring what I think we have always sort of intuitively known, that these flowers are good for us. And some of the things that I find most interesting are the vitamin C content of blossoms. Some of these flowers, like wild violet, are the first flowers to show up in the spring. If you go out to Reser, they're some of the first things to bloom, especially out at Spruce Coulee. And vitamin C content in the spring is always something that I wondered about for the First Peoples here and how they manage that, and animals. And one of the ways to really clean out the body is to eat high vitamin C in the spring, and wild violet blooming first. It has a higher content of vitamin C and A than oranges by weight. So I mean, they're highly nutritionally dense little packages, and very good for you. You can dry them and you can eat them later. Flowers. Well, this is one of my favorite pictures from last year's flower menu. We did a small flower menu at Coderre Flower Farm to approach some of the folks in the area to see if there was some interest in it. This was, I think, this was our midsummer blend, and you can see a blend of sunset runner beans, roses, some different colored calendulas, and frizzy pansies in this blend. These were the smaller ones, and they were really well received. We weren't sure what the community would be looking for or interested in, so we will be doing that again this year. But one of my favorite quotes about flowers: always make people better, happier, and more helpful. They are sunshine, food, and medicine to the soul. And I have to say, I mean, when I drop off the packages of flowers to businesses or to artisans, I mean, everybody's always thrilled. And it's not about me being there. I mean, it's just so beautiful getting this package of things that you can theoretically eat. So this is sort of the meat of the presentation that I really wanted to talk about today. I don't know how many, I'd love to hear in the chat how many of you grew up interested in eating flowers and then were told the things that I was, which was, you know, eating flowers is dangerous, that they may kill you, that you could die. I mean, these are very extreme fears. This is something that we call biophobia. Obviously, we know that not all plants are poisonous, or we would never eat plants. So where did the idea that all flowers are poisonous, or all berries, or all mushrooms, or some of these things that we forage come from? And it comes from the fact that we lost knowledge, that it wasn't handed down necessarily. And I was very lucky. My mom was always very interested in her garden and eating flowers. So I grew up with an idea that you could eat some flowers, and I was given a lot of freedom to learn. I was absolutely taught, you know, there are certain ones you just don't touch. And we'll cover some of those in a bit. But I wanted to hear kind of from the folks out there, how many of them have grown up with this sort of very deep, and it is a very deep fear. It's, I think any of us who have been in that position, I mean, where you're trying to explain to someone, well, you can eat that. They look at you like, well, are you sure though? Like they're pretty sure you're going to drop dead right there in front of them. And when you don't, then it opens up this kind of can of worms about, well, what have they been told that maybe isn't accurate? And that's a really challenging place to be, because it's not a big field. There's not a lot of, I would say, there's not a lot of quantitative data. And what quantitative data is out there on flowers is often either in vitro, so which means that they're taking chemical components of the flowers, concentrating them, and then applying them in a way that we most likely would not be using or accessing. And then that scientific study is sort of blanketed out there as the be all end all answer. And I'll go through one of them in a bit. And often those studies, because they're taking plants out of context, they often misconstrue how unsafe some of these things are. Not to say that they're all safe, but I believe that we're very intelligent. We need to use that thinking. Fear of
Amber,
nature is something. Oh, hi.
I was just going to cut in and say that there are a few comments
Oh,
in the
sure.
chat about the, like I commented because I said it's a miracle that I'm still alive, because no one told me not to
Yes.
eat flowers.
Yeah.
Or maybe they were too distracted or whatever. Nicole said that she was told not to eat daffodils because they were toxic.
Yeah, that one's true, actually. That one's
legit.
I wouldn't eat daffodils.
I'm glad you never ate daffodils, Nicole. And then the Pratch family mentioned that they just had a good friend's horse die from eating flowers. So
yes, and that is an interesting, really interesting component out here in the rural community. Excuse me, sorry. Because there are a number of blossoms that, let's just face it, some of the grazing animals can eat in much, much higher volumes than what we would. That being said, some of them are absolutely toxic. Like the oxeye daisy is one that I'm always, don't put that in your wildflower blend. So I think that where we get into plants and being consumed as food, I think we need to be careful how we teach each other. And I mean, you bring up a good point in that how many of us now, I had a bit of a different childhood in that my family was supportive of some foraging and eating flowers and that type of thing. So and we have passed that on with our son as well. But the children are really interesting. They're going to eat these things. I have to put it out there. And not to skew the whole conversation, but my background before I was a master gardener was I was a pediatric ICU nurse. So I saw a lot of things that kids would eat that were absolutely deadly. But I found that with my own family and the children around me, when you are able to, like my example, when I sat down at the table and ate a hibiscus flower just before dinner, what it did was it opened up something in my son's mind that said, if I come, so they seem to want to show us more. And I address it a little bit later, but kids are, if they don't believe that they're going to be reprimanded for everything, they actually kind of want to share more of what they're thinking of doing with you. And so I found that my nephews and kids in family, whether it was mushrooms or berries or wildflowers or whatever I'm doing, I'm the first one that they run to show. Can I eat this? Right. And that has come from being open to it. And I know it sounds like a soapbox, but kids they're going to experiment anyway with some of these things. And I think if they know, like the daffodils, if they know that they can trust you and ask you, well, don't eat that one, but eat that one instead. Because muscari, like grape hyacinths, those little bulbs that grow in the spring, there's a lot of them that are edible. Not all of them taste good, but and there's a difference between the flowers and the bulbs. So, which is a whole different aside, but it's a really interesting discussion. Yeah, there's my aside for that. Hopefully, I answered if there were any questions. But I think that many of us have been in the position where we've had to wonder, or I've wondered, why can't I eat this? Maybe I'm just a bit of an odd bird, but that has sort of brought about the second half of this discussion here we'll get into. But I just wanted to put some things out there to remind myself and others that we as humans have survived by learning from nature for millions of years. That does not mean that everything we've tried has worked. And I do include a list of some poisonous plants. I didn't include any lists of plants that were poisonous to pets or animals. I didn't think of that. Sorry, that would be something to definitely have another class on, because there are absolutely plants that affect animals very poorly, including farm and agricultural animals, so especially around here. I did want to say that my biggest belief is that if you can choose knowledge and choose gaining knowledge, I think it takes away fear. And I think that confidence is self-earned. I have a hard time. You can learn a certain amount of things from other people. I mean, we can go to class, we can read a book, but until that confidence comes from you trying things yourself, I think that we are very good at downloading our confidence from other people in this culture. And I think that flowers are a really big part, just like gardening, that you gain yourself over time. I wanted to include this little narrative. This was something I just took off Wikipedia, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago. And it highlights very well, I think, some of the biophobia that is out there and some of the interesting, what's the word? Interesting perspectives on pharmacology and scientific data that are out there. So I'm just going to read a quick. Some flowers are safe to eat only in small amounts, like apple flowers contain cyanide precursors, and Johnny jump ups contain saponins. Borage and daylily flowers are diuretic, and sweet woodruff can have blood thinning effects. The flowers of the linden trees are reportedly safe in small amounts, but heavy consumption can cause heart damage. Marigolds can be harmful in large amounts, and only certain, sorry, I can't even see the bottom here on my screen, but only certain types are palatable, I think is what it says. But one of the considerations I wanted to bring forward just as food for thought, and it's, you know, I'd like it to be an open, thoughtful discussion at some point, is that there's a lot of fear in the word choices here. All of us have learned that, you know, cyanide is a really bad thing, that that's not something that we should have anything to do with. Blood thinners are very scary. When I came from a medical background, I came from a pharmacology background. And so I bring that into some of the things that I read, and I recognize that not everybody has that ability or that training. But I mean, just to bring into thought, and it is a discussion, cyanide precursors are not cyanide. Cyanogens are something that exists in a lot of plants like elderflower, apple blossoms. These are things that people have made wine with and used for teas for a number of, you know, for thousands of years, really, when you look back through the old herbals. And what they're used for is a cooling effect on the body. And how they do that is they interrupt something called the Krebs cycle, which gets into some mitochondria and metabolism. But point being that they've been used safely in herbal medicine for years. So when we read things about eating flowers that are full of language that I think is sort of alarmist, I think that we need to listen to the message and the narrative and think about what do we believe that this is saying in between. Now, that doesn't mean all things are safe. For example, they talk about the saponins in Johnny Jump Ups. Now, I eat Johnny Jump Ups all the time. They are high in vitamin C. They make great lotions. They make great tea. They are just a fantastic little plant. But saponins are those components of a plant chemistry that are like, how do I just best describe it? They're a steroid. They've got a little sugar tail on the end of them, and that sugar tail is safe within our gut. But if we were to inject it or have it into the bloodstream, it would be devastating. Just like, yeah, there's lots of things we shouldn't inject into our bloodstream. But our body is built to recognize what to do with this. For example, licorice root has it all the time. Ginseng has another type of saponin. So when we see things that are written that all saponins are deadly, or that implication that all saponins are deadly, I think we need to stop and go, okay, well, what is the message here? And why is this the message? And granted, there are a lot of folks who don't want to put that much thought into the flowers, which is totally fine. But there are ways to check and see if the flowers you want to eat are safe. And there are ways to grow ones that you know are safe. But when you're reading for information, I just wanted to put this out there for folks who are going to do their own research. When you're talking about things like heavy consumption, the word use heavy consumption, it means something very different. A lot of these biochemistry studies are done on species that are not human, and they're fed an amount of usually plant constituent. It's not often even the plant. So you really do need to read the pharmacology studies with an open mind. And there's some really good resources for that type of training and that type of learning. And if anybody has any questions, I can definitely send them some resources on that type of pharmacology if they want to get more into it. But just to hear through the message that a lot of these things have been safe for a long time. And just because now we understand some of the chemical components and how they could potentially be extracted and then misused once they've been extracted, doesn't mean that the original plant was unsafe. You know, and bearing in mind that lots of things that we frequently consume that are man-made chemicals are, if we were to eat them in the volume that they give these plant constituents like apple blossoms, they would also make us very ill. So again, there's an investigation aspect of reading what information is out there. So my theories on how to not die eating flowers. And a lot of this comes from, you know, sort of my comfort with herbal medicine, but also in information that's kind of come before from other generations on eating flowers. I just have 4 things that I think really can direct us to use flowers safely. And We don't always have time for all of them, but I think if we keep it in mind, it definitely does direct a lot of it. So gaining knowledge. And I'll go through each of them individually because I think they're worthwhile. But relationships, I am a big believer in. Plants are about relationships. It is not just as simple as going to the nursery and saying, I just want this plant and this, I don't want to know about it. If you're wanting to add in new plants to your diet, I believe it's always worth the research so that you know more about it. Sharing and teaching, this is where that aspect of children and our pets and our responsibilities and things that come into our life definitely can benefit from that aspect of sharing what we're learning. And then the difference between gaining knowledge and gaining wisdom, that confidence to know that what you're doing is okay, and knowing that you are, that you're doing it safely. So reading is always kind of where I start. I'm a bit of a book nerd that way. And I included some flower references for folks if you probably don't have access to the slides, but if you want the references, I can definitely send them to you later. I really recommend folks who are interested in edible flowers to just pick up even an introductory book like The Flowers in Your Kitchen by Susan Belsinger. I still use it. It was just a little, I think I actually got it at the Hat Library book sale. There's quite a few books out there that are just introductory. They have nice little recipes, and they do have that sort of security of just you telling yourself like this is good to go. Like roses are good to eat. I'm okay with that. One of the books that just came out recently, I just did a review for our library out here on, is called Eat Your Front Yard by Matt Coward. It's fabulous. It's a fabulous book. He's a British fella who has recognized that in England and in some more higher density populations, a lot of folks have bylaw restrictions about what they can grow in their front yard. So they need to grow things that are ornamental based on bylaws. But a lot of them don't have accesses to allotment gardens or places where they can grow larger amounts of food. So Matt wrote this book about what you can eat, and he gives recipes. I mean, he's got popped amaranth and how to use that, and how to use dahlia tubers, and just a number of things that I didn't even think of. So it's a fabulous book. So there's a couple other books there that are also really good, and I won't go through all of them. There's a number of podcasts out there that I think are worthwhile. A lot happening in Australia. The Floriade is from Australia, sorry, and it's got good information. And then there's social feeds. Social feeds aren't always everything. I mean, you can take them with a grain of salt. There's ours. One of the ones that I follow quite closely is Gourmet Sweet Botanicals. They do just amazing things with edible flowers. And I should have included them here as well, but there are two major farms in the UK, the Maddox and Bumblebee. And then there's a company out of the States, the name escapes me right now, but they have a running list of edible flowers that you can order. And if you even just use them as a reference, like, oh, well, they sell radish blossoms as an edible flower, I can buy them from this company for this much, then your radish blossoms from your yard or your brassica blossoms from your yard will also be absolutely safe to eat. Our elders in our family have usually really funny stories about flowers, some of them good, some of them bad. I know my grandfather refused to eat muffins once because he found out that somebody put marigold flowers in them. That was too much for him. But I think that, we can teach each other about them. Relationships, because I'm an herbalist as well, plants have a different sort of paradigm shift out of my hyper medical background a few years ago. And I realized, how much I relate to plants as friends and other beings of our planet, which sounds super new age if I think about it out loud. But the reality is I believe that plants have evolved with their own personalities, and fireweed being one of my absolute favorites from up north. It's a favorite jelly in our house. We use it to make sweet tea. We use it to make jams. We use it to make dried tea. I mean, there's just a ton we use it for, and the roots are good too. So one of the things that I taught my son, he was about 11 when we started foraging. And he was keen on foraging mushrooms as well, which was terrifying for me. I mean, I absolutely had a panic attack every time he'd come home with something, did you eat it? Like, tell me you didn't eat it before we can look it up, like that type of mom mode. And one of the things I taught him and I had to do for myself in order to stay sane was I just chose one or two things to get to know really well. It's a biteable amount of information. If you go, okay, I can't learn all the flowers that are out there, but perhaps rose and pansies are something that I would like to get to know. And that allows your mind to focus on getting to know them and researching them and being creative with using them without feeling overwhelmed with all of the other options out there for flowers. Another way of relating is to get to know your grower. There's a few businesses I sell to in town that are very focused on, just because it's going into food, they really want to know that it's not sprayed. And that is a component of edible flowers that is really important. Even when you're foraging, especially around here, did the county spray the roads? Are you if you're picking wildflowers, or are you in a garden where what you're foraging is not sprayed? I mean, I have a neighbor, God love him, gave me his choke cherries last year. And he said to me, well, I don't know, next year I think I might spray it with formaldehyde because I got to get rid of this bug on it. And I thought, don't know if I want them after the formaldehyde, right? So I think, having that discussion about chemical exposure to the plants is really important to have. It definitely doesn't need to be done in a way that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Snobby. Just needs to be done in a way that's safe. I'm planning on eating this. So is there anything that was put on it that might not be good for me to eat? Sharing, again, comes down to my opinions on kids and identifying plants. I have taught kids for years, homeschool kids and my own and different communities, community gardens out on the coast. And children are really keen to understand this. And I think that that's why they, like Genevieve was saying, that's why they'll turn around and sneak something that you're like, oh God, what did you just eat? And I think they're curious and they're very, very teachable. And I think if you give them a direction, like this flower, this is my cousin's daughter, and this flower is safe for you to eat. You can eat the petals from this one, but don't eat any of the other ones because I don't know. Oh, okay. And then they tend to come and ask you about things more often. And I've had a lot of really good luck with kids. I've luckily never had any bad experiences with my own. When I was a nurse, I know we saw a lot of mushroom issues. And, again, I think that the same approach will work as well there, hopefully. And share successes and failures in using flowers for food. I tried spring rolls once with flowers and then I deep fried them and they were just awful. I mean, they were just goo. So I think that if we teach each other, and I'm a big part of the social media community for edible flowers with that too, because I think I learn a lot from the other folks that are cooking with them on a regular basis, which has been really exciting. Gaining wisdom is always a little bit different to me than gaining knowledge. Knowledge is what you understand from the books and what you can read. Gaining wisdom is that confidence that, I know eating roses is safe and good for me. There's just that internalized knowledge. I've done it. It hasn't killed me. Daylily pods are a big one that I find really funny. A lot of people, I'm going to preface this with daylilies are not lilies. They're a different Latin family altogether, but daylilies are very edible and they're actually very good to eat. And in Asia, they're an old component of stews and stir fries that have been around for eons. And I really like them, but that first time you eat one, you kind of wonder, is it just going to kill me? Everybody else lived, but for some reason, this is something that, I shouldn't eat. And I found that over time, that wisdom and confidence is kind of crucial and anyways, helps me understand the plant world as I relate to things a little bit more. Genevieve, maybe, are there any questions or anything at this point before we flop into recipes?
I had a question. Do I count?
Oh, of course.
I was just wondering if some people are allergic to flowers. Like I know people are allergic
That's a
to
really good question.
the pollen, but do some people have allergic reactions to eating them, even if they're not allergic to the pollen?
Well, I have never had a client or a friend, like I've never had a case where they weren't allergic to the pollen and then they ate the flower and had a reaction. I've never had that happen. But like I have a very close friend who's super allergic to a number of pollens and she can't go anywhere near those edible flowers.
Mm.
Like just it's really, you know, a shutdown of things. I had again, this was a friend. Again, I can only speak for, I have never had a client have this happen, but I had a good flax forever and ever. And she was deathly allergic to roses. And she I don't know, she had 20 different kinds of roses. She was so stubborn, she still grew them, but she couldn't eat them and she had to wear gloves and she could barely even smell them. She still grew them. But again, that was a pollen based thing. So I have never had a client be allergic to the blossoms that wouldn't have been allergic to the pollen. Can't say that is for sure. I wish I knew the answer solidly. I've never heard of a case though.
Okay, thank you.
To answer your question.
Yep.
And I think it brings up, like, for example, there's a lot, how do I put this? There's a lot more pollen on these flowers than we really give credit for. I mean, we can see pollen on a lily. We can see pollen in the air off goldenrod. We can see even some of the roses, you can see pollen like right there. But to bear in mind that all the flowers have pollen, you know, some of the most active areas of my garden for bees and pollinators are on those like little microscopic melon flowers that I get for cucamelons that are just like, oh, I don't know, they're just teeny, teeny, teeny. And there's a ton of pollen in them because the bees are there all day. So bearing in mind, that's going to make a difference. So, any other questions about safety? I mean, there's probably a ton of questions out there, but I don't know how to answer them all off the get-go.
Yeah, if people have questions right now, they can just ask them or they can put it in the chat, or we can keep them, we can save it for the end too.
Yeah, because I mean, the first bit's been theoretical. I'm going to cover a list of edible flowers that are absolutely safe and then some that are, you know, absolutely not. And there are, I hate to say it, but there are gray areas in here because there's just frankly not, there's that disconnect between an industrial culture and a plant-based culture that was harvesting its own food. And so because we've lost some of those stories and because now we have the you know, ability to research a lot of these chemical components, that scientific world is catching up to the produce world. And now we're starting to see that data and research being done in bigger centers on edible flowers and also like the safe processing of them so that you don't end up with an E. coli outbreak, you know, like you might with strawberries or lettuce or, you know, other things that we've seen come out of the States too. So, but I thought to jump into the kitchen, which is where we want people to use these, would be those starting tips for eating flowers, besides the ones that I gave earlier about just picking a couple, is that sort of, I know this seems like a really obvious thing to say, but you got to taste the flowers because they don't all taste like you expect. For example, some of them do, but like bee balm, this is wild bee balm, harvested here out in the Cypress Hills. And it's very spicy. It tastes like in my mind, I always, you know, figured bee balm was something Swedish, right? Bees like honey and sweet things. And in my mind, it was a bit of a shock actually when I first tried wild bee balm out on the coast, because it's very oregano-like, very, very strong. And so I always tell people just a nibble, like a rose petal, will give you an idea of kind of what your taste is going to be like from those flowers. When serving flowers, and this just comes down to being compassionate, I think, when serving flowers to family and friends new to eating them, remember that that initial fear is programmed into all of us. Something different, something, you know, wild, and it's a good and healthy thing. We should be cautious. So I think remembering that if you're serving to other people, they might not be ready to eat flowers. And one of the best ways to just start slowly is you just tear the petals up into something that they get used to. So salad, ice cubes are great as serving flowers initially. And it gives them the option of whether they want to eat them or not. Like I tell a story about, I think I brought a sample to one of the local cafes and they did these beautiful sugared blossoms on top of cupcakes. And they were all edible. I mean, they were beautiful flowers. But I went back about a week later and I was talking to one of the girls who had one, and she said, yeah, I just set it on the side. Like she didn't, she wasn't ready to eat it. And that's okay. I think that that is just fine. And I think we need to give people time to be sure. I mean, my son doesn't eat purple carrots, doesn't like them, thinks they taste weird. It's the same idea. Candied blossoms, if you're going to do candied blossoms for an event, give yourself a lot of time. They do take a lot of time to do. And I have tried to rush it before, and it's always really frustrating and you want to pull your hair out. So just as an aside, if you're candying the blossoms, give yourself tons of time. This is, I hate to give you guys this big long list because it's just huge. There are so many flowers that are safe and edible and are actually quite tasty. Do we want to read all the way through them? Do you want me to, or do you think everybody's probably familiar with some of these?
I think
A
that
lot of
I mean, if people, we're going to save the presentation and we're going to host
perfect.
like the slides on the website so people can catch
Okay.
it there, because I think it's all just going to get like, that's how my brain works at least. It's just all going to be
Yeah.
like, you know, a day radish blossom. I'll be like, yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah,
Also, we do have a question in the chat.
sure.
Monica says,
Sure.
should you only serve petals with no green parts when preparing to avoid bitterness? I think it's a great
Yes.
question.
Actually, it's a great question. The greens are definitely, they contain more of those components that are bitter. Sometimes you want that bitterness depending on what you're doing with them. So if you're making mead, or some people want some in wine, they want to include a few of them. They won't include all of them. But I'm kind of lazy. I just eat them. I don't mind the bitter flavor. But remember that the bitter flavor comes with chemical components that are a little bit more medicinal, and depending on the plant, that might not be desirable. I hate to give a non-answer, but it really depends on the plant. I mean, roses are a perfect example where if you remove the petals, they're going to taste better. That especially dependent on what type of rose you are using. For example, some of the hybrid roses like the Parkland series, they are beautiful and they have a wonderful soft scent. And they're one of my favorite roses, the Morden Sunrise, and I grow it all the time. But I find that the greens on that are bitter. The wild rose, again, I find the greens on that bitter. Does it bother me? Not really, to be honest. But for example, a hollyhock, which is, I spent a lot of time with hollyhock last year. I always remove those. For tea or for just using in your salad or whatever you're going to do with them. The stamen, you know, like in a holly, I don't have a picture of one anywhere, but the big pollen stamen in the center of a hollyhock, single hollyhock, I take those out. They're bitter and they're not really that pleasant.
So maybe if we're trying to persuade our friends and loved ones to try flowers, then start with petals.
Absolutely. And I think you're going to see that in like calendula. The petals have a nice mild flavor to them. I mean, it's barely there, but I'm sorry, but the greens don't have that flavor. So I find calendula quite bitter myself. I don't use a lot of it unless I'm going to take the petals off.
We have one more question.
Yeah.
Shannon is asking if sweet peas are edible.
No, darn it, not edible. Unfortunately, they're called sweet peas, and I'm not entirely, and I'm gonna have to get back to you, Shannon, on that exact chemical component of what is the issue with them, but they are not edible. What I do is I eat the pea pods or the pea blossoms from like snap peas. I grow a variety called dwarf gray that's quite bright pink and white, and it has that sweet pea look, but it's not edible. And it's actually one of the toughest ones to not get the kids to eat because it's not good for them. And so the other one that I'll slip in there is lupins. I don't know how many people have had the experience with kids with those they look like baby pea pods on like buffalo bean or lupins. There are varieties of lupin seeds that are edible once they're roasted, but I am not an expert in it. And so in my house, those were just like we don't eat those. that helpful?
I think that that is helpful. Yeah. I think that isn't there something you can dye things with the sweet peas, right?
Yeah, sweet peas, I've never used them to dye anything, but I can't see why you wouldn't be able to. I mean, the colors are unreal. I know we're putting in 4 or 5 new ones this year just for our bouquets. So, I mean, they're what I love about them is the scent. And if you like for example, if you like infusing things with the floral scents, I know that my husband's not a big fan, but I love chocolate that's been infused with flower scents. I would love to be able to, get that sweet pea scent into something, but it's just not. There are so many other options and it's just not worth it. I think what we need to do is have more discussions as gardeners. I think that people are more interested in this. And I think what's happening, for example, in the UK, I'm so excited about the fact that they're actually researching it now. Like, oh, okay, let's actually get some studies in here so that we're not just going with anecdotal information, and we can back up what we know historically with the science that I think we benefit from. But there's still questions there. Some of the people doing some of the best work I've ever seen on this type of sort of border issue of what you can eat and what you can't or shouldn't eat is Baker's Creek Seeds. They just came out with that lupin coffee, but it's a specific type of Swiss lupin that you can roast to make a coffee substitute. So again, they're pushing the boundaries there a little bit more. Helpful.
Perfect. Thank you.
What
Probably give people a chance to write some things down from your list too.
Yeah. And we're going to put an index on our Instagram that'll be available in the stories. I think that's what came out of this for me the most, was just even writing the class, was I'm going to do as we harvest throughout the year, because it's seasonal. If it's available, I think what I'm going to do is put an index into the Instagram, and we'll just have a highlight so that, because one of the things I want people to be able to do is if they buy one of our mixes, I want them to be able to go, oh, this is what a radish blossom looks like, because I just don't know, right? And so hopefully that will be another resource throughout the year. It's going to take me the season to build, and then we can, kind of make it available for folks. One of the things that I think I just want to locally highlight that people don't realize is edible is lilac. Lilac is an amazing herb, and it's used a lot by some of the Northern First Nations. But I think that just for people to know that lilac is a really fun edible herb. And if they're going to do an infused like custard, or they're going to do an infused sugar, lilac is a fantastic option. Just putting it out there as a prairie sort of specialty. So there you go. I did want to cover a little bit about poisons. I think it's come up a little bit. And what's poisonous, like, for example, what's poisonous for cattle might not necessarily be for us, although often they're related. But I think it's easy to get sort of starry-eyed and rose-colored glasses about, well, all the flowers are okay. It's I don't know how many times I've seen it where, well, if we're going to challenge the information from the past, there's a difference between challenging what we've been told and kind of throwing it all in the garbage. And I think that would be a mistake. So for example, I know Genevieve and I have talked about it, like foxglove is tremendously poisonous. Wolfbane, another one. These are extremely poisonous flowers, and those poisons developed as a defense mechanism for a reason. So I really want people to, think about this more as an educational process to watch for. Don't assume that flowers are all safe, or even that they all taste good. I mean, I don't like the taste of snapdragons. They're edible and people buy them to eat, but I find them bland and bitter myself. So just a thought out there for you. Just to use respect, as with anything. So I just wanted to cover a little bit fun, like, let's just go back to being simple and how to quickly, easily do this. And if you want to bring them into your life, there's a lot of options without getting into some of the scary. I mean, I like to play in some of the grayer areas of things, but that's definitely not everybody's cup of tea. So one of the best things, I mean, flavored vinegars and salts and rubs, butters, I mean, just your chive blossoms. Chive blossoms chopped up into butter, sitting in the fridge, and then you do your toast with it on the barbecue. I mean, it's amazing. They're so flavorful. They're a lot of fun. Torn petals, again, that gets into some of things. I kind of break the edible flowers up into 2 groups, and it's how we offer our mixes. So, you're going to find on our, sorry, the website's still under construction. There was a big change I needed to do and it didn't happen last week. So one of the biggest things is I break things up into savory or sort of florally sweet groups. So savory flowers would be like, your nasturtiums, your daylilies, pea pods, bean blossoms. I mean, even my son eats bean blossoms and they just taste like beans. I mean, they're fantastic. And chopping them up into your salad or putting them in a wrap or whatever are just fun ways of doing it. Blossoms and ice cubes. I mean, borage has been used forever as blossoms and ice cubes. It has that nice cucumber flavor. And for those of us that I have to admit, I'm not a huge cucumber fan. It's a way to get that flavor into dips and sour cream and things like that that are fun to play with. Stuffed flower appies. I had a couple on the slide before. I don't know if you guys caught those, like fritters. When you're talking squash blossoms, they're the male component with the blossom on the end, and then they just get dipped in like a tempura batter or stuffed. One of the things I'm really excited, I'm not sure if I'm going to get them this year. I'm hoping my tulip crop comes through. It's a bit odd weather out here, but tulips are edible. And so a lot of people don't realize, like, you can remove the stamen from inside a tulip, and you can actually fill that with some like mascarpone cheese and garlic and like, warm those up. And they're just these cute little boats that are fun to serve as an appetizer. Grilled flowers, a lot of people, so Baker's Creek, one of my favorite seed suppliers and seed savers, they put out a recipe last year for grilled sunflower, and I shared it in the next slide, and it just blew my mind. But fabulous, and with the sunflowers we have around here and how they grow, I think that it's something to think of. Meat substitutes, so a lot of like daylilies, like this picture here with the orange daylily, those lily petals, and I should say daylily petals, they're not lilies, those daylily petals get really thick. And in monasteries, they used to actually dry them so that they were quite hard, like jerky, and then they'd add them to their soups and they were chewy. And if you're on a plant-based diet, it's a nice little substitute change for those kind of things. So I included the grilled sunflower herb recipe here. I'll put it into our Instagram as well, but it's really, really simple. It's just the big seed sunflowers. So not the cut flower ones that are really pretty, but like the heavy seeded ones. And you just rub it down with infused oil or cooking oil or whatever you have on hand, salt and pepper, and you grill it for 5 minutes. You take all the petals off and you just grill it on the barbecue. There's a great video from Baker's Creek on Facebook and on YouTube, I think, with this. And if you grill them before the sunflower seeds set into those hard coatings when they're still white, it's like corn on the cob. And it's just a lot of fun. And as a foodie, it's kind of a fun, different thing to try. The other thing that people don't realize about sunflowers, and we're going to offer them this year, is the sunflower buds are, you can treat them like artichokes, like artichoke hearts. You can steam them and cut the edges off. And then those center cores that are part of the sunflower are like what you would chop up to do your artichoke dip. And they have a very similar taste. And for this climate, when your sunflowers grow so well here, and artichokes really struggle. I know I did artichokes last year, but the heat just cooked them. And we're putting new wind fencing in this year, which will hopefully help with that. But I know it was a challenge. A couple more slides. And one of the biggest aspects, one of the fun aspects of flowers is the baker's options for flowers. I mean, my dad was a baker by trade. He actually used to own Redcliffe Bakery before Paul, and then now the new owners. It's just fabulous. And so I grew up around a baker. And infused butter, infused creams, all really lovely additions. And when you're starting out using flowers, like for example, rose, if you're infusing a cream with rose before you make, I don't know, cake or pound cake or any of those things, just going to create this delicate floral smell and scent to it. But it doesn't necessarily give you that chewy petal flavor that many people are not really keen on. Candied flowers are always a fun option, and they're just beautiful. They turn out amazing. There's some really good instructions for them online, so I didn't do them here. Petals and cookies or muffins. I think this is really a nice place to begin. I mean, dandelion muffins. If anybody wants a recipe for dandelion muffins, I will post it. They're just fabulous, and in the spring, it's a really nice addition. It kind of dandelions have a bit of a honey flavor to them. If you've ever made the jelly, it really tastes like honey. Cake toppers. So this would be where you'd get into using dahlias and peonies, roses, some of the bigger flowers that have a beautiful scent and are safe to eat. And they just give you that little peace of mind that you're putting them on top of your cake and it's not going to make your cake inedible. So they are lovely. Peony is also one that the Chinese used a lot of, and they chop it up and put it in their salads and greens and stuff like that. The blossoms, sorry, the petals. Pressed blossom cookies and chocolate and candy flavor. I included a recipe for the pressed blossoms. It's not a recipe, it's more instructions, but I'll go through that after. And then I just wanted to say one of my favorite things ever, we went to a chocolate salon, which was like a big deal out in Montreal, all chocolatiers from all over the world. And one of the best recipes and displays that was there was infused. Again, they used flowers to infuse their cream, and then they made their chocolates with that cream, and they were unreal. So I gave you guys just a little bit of instruction here on how to use the pressed flowers, or if you're lazy like me, I don't mind pressing flowers, but it takes a long time. So if you want to use fresh flowers or fresh herbs in your shortbread, there's a nice easy way to do that. And that is just simply that you make your shortbread cookies like you normally would. You have all of your little fresh flowers there and you just press them into the raw dough. Instead of cooking those cookies that day, just throw them in the freezer overnight. And what happens is that freezer breaks all those cells and in the flour. And when you cook them, they don't keep all their color, but they do keep a lot more of their color. So if you want that nice bright, purple of the pansy or pink of the runner bean or whatever you've got, that's there. And final words. So deep frying, like I told you about my spring roll experience, always changes the color. If you're making donuts, use the dried flower petals first, or add the donuts to your like the flowers to your glaze. Just because a flower is edible does not mean it tastes good. It seems obvious, but it's true. And then again, that gets back to that question about allergies, is that the pollen that folks can be terribly allergic to things. And like I have a friend who's terribly allergic to burdock. I don't know anybody allergic to burdock. And it is awful for her. So, I mean, just bearing that in mind is that it's not that, if they're allergic to all daisy flowers, that they're going to be fine with everything else. You really do need to know if your people have pollen allergies. So there you go. Thank you very much, everybody. Any questions?
There's one more question in the chat right now.
Sure.
Nicole is asking if you do workshops or have tutorials that you can recommend for beginner level recipes.
Oh, for sure. Gosh, one of the best social feeds for beginner level recipes I'll put out there. I don't know how to type into my chat. Maybe Genevieve can. It's that @gourmet sweet botanicals. And they've got a link to some initial recipes that I think are just fabulous. They just do beautiful things. I have to be honest, I haven't done a workshop because there isn't an inch of my property that isn't under construction right now. So the flower studio that we're building will have a small kitchen in it. And so when things open up, I should be able to offer some baking workshops and that type of thing. So we're talking probably next season. But for introductory, I mean, I can't say enough about gourmet sweet botanicals. They just nail it every time. I mean, they do donuts and they do cheesecake and they do meat trays that are just they're just unbelievable. So appetizers and all that. Is that helpful? Don't get me wrong, we should get something local going here.
I know there's a few of the local bakeries and restaurants have some flowers incorporated into some of their dishes.
Yeah.
There's plenty of more.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when you see them locally, like I know Zucchini Blossom's been awesome. And Sarah at the Sweetness Bakery, she does a lot with them. I know up until this point, lots of folks have accessed the flowers through Fresh, and they're pretty. Oops, sorry, I got a bug. They're pretty good about that discussion about chemical free. We should be at. I'm still trying to nail it down. I mean, everything's been so up in the air. I'm still trying to nail down the farmers market this year and the botanical markets downtown, but you should be able to find our stuff at McBride's this year is the hope. And at the farmers market. And then we're going to kind of work towards stop it. I've got this cat who's trying to hog the screen here. We're going to work towards some workshops out here is the goal. I think just given this year, I have to admit, I've just kind of gone, I don't want to figure it out.
Understandable.
Yeah. So we'll shoot for next year.
Cool. We have another question.
Mhm.
All cultivars of the edible flowers you had listed on your slide edible?
That's a really good question. Let me look back at my slide. Sorry, I don't want to tell anyone, like, when I checked it, I didn't think it all the way through that way. Usually they're all fine.
Yeah, you told us not to die, so.
Don't die. Don't die. I'm just reading. The only ones I would say I'm not as familiar with, I haven't done a ton with, is my peonies. I haven't done a ton with because they're still fairly immature. This year I'm going to be partnering with a local grower and I'm going to be doing a lot more experimenting with them. So I would say, as far as I know, all the peony varieties are okay, but there's a lot of new varieties coming out in peonies right now. So that one I can't say as 100%. And the other one that I'm not as familiar with, just because I don't grow it, is honeysuckle. But I have friends who have never had an issue. So as far as like somebody brought up the sweet pea. That's the other thing I would say is, I mean, pea, like all edible pea blossoms, like, you know, for Laxton Progress or, you know, your snap peas, like Oregon Snap, those are all good to go. The other thing I'll say is like elderflower. I don't know how many people have experienced elderflower. It's really one of those border plants between, and it's interesting because mythology wise, it's actually a border plant in mythology as well. But it's a border plant between medicine and food. And there is a component of elderberry that can actually cause nausea if you consume it in big volumes. And when I say big volumes, it would be like if I drank, you know, a teapot full of elderflower tea, for especially with the stems on still, not just the flowers pulled off. If I drank pot after pot, I couldn't say as I wouldn't be nauseous. I would probably be nauseous by the evening. So again, elderflower is one of those flowers that you want to use with some intelligence. Like if you're making mead or wine, they're amazing. I can't drink enough elderberry through the winter. I drink a ton of it. So I think that that's an experiential thing. Is that helpful?
I think so, yeah. I know that with the elderberries, you also want to get the stems off.
Yeah.
I spent so much time last year. I was like, great, all these elderberries. And then I was like, oh, so much work.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I drink the stem. But that's me. And I preface that with, I mean, yeah, I've learned a lot about these things. And then, I mean, absolutely, historically, you're supposed to remove the stems. I had an experience last year where I was quite sick, and this is without getting into some of my herbalism too much. I was sitting with the plant, and it told me in its own way, you need to drink the stems. And so it was just my one batch, and I never did it after that. And I was okay, and it was fine. But it had something to do with there are higher components in those stems, right? And they're not. Elderberry is a medicine as well as a food, so should be considered as such.
Cool. Monica says, thanks so much. A very interesting and informative presentation. Nicole says, this was excellent. Thank you so much, Amber and Genevieve, for putting this together. Do you want to give me back the sharing, or can't stop sharing your screen if you're done sharing, Amber? And then I'm going to just share a couple things about other stuff happening this week.
Absolutely. So, oh my goodness. Now how do I stop sharing? Isn't that the question of life?
I think it should be at the top.
Pause share? Is that the same thing?
That's probably it. Maybe.
Does that work? Paused share.
Okay, I guess I can also do it for you. I can just bully you out of it.
You can go for it.
You're canceled.
There you go.
And then I'm gonna figure out how to do it. We're learning together. Oh, maybe I should open the window first. And you can totally judge me based on how many tabs I have open.
Oh, so
because it's
don't
always,
look at mine.
Yeah, it's always like 20. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm supposed to be the professional. I'm not the professional. Okay, I'm gonna use this one. That's what's gonna happen. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. How about that? Still seeing?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
So
And I'm going to mute myself now though. Okay, just
perfect. So this presentation was part of our week-long seed exchange here in really based in Medicine Hat, but the events are open to anyone because they're all online except for the seed exchange itself. So what we did this year so that we could exchange seeds is we put little containers in each of the little free libraries around Medicine Hat, and I believe that there's 13. And people can go to those little free libraries and drop off seeds that they would like to share, packaged in little packages, just enough for a family to grow for the year. Please don't share any invasive species. There's a list, albertainvasives.org, I think. We also have that on the website. And then, yeah, we have a Facebook event where you can put in the comment section what you've shared or what you've taken or what's left in the bins. And then, oh, look at that. These are the next presentations. So tomorrow we've got at 1 p.m. Climate Change and Food Systems, which is a recorded event or presentation from Seeds of Diversity. And then we're going to be able to do some discussion around that too. Oh, I think that, okay, that says Thursday. It should be Wednesday. And then Wednesday evening, it's an event offered by the Southern Alberta and Calgary Climate Hubs, which is with the author Michael Mann. He was on the CBC Alberta at noon yesterday talking about climate change, among other things, and his new book, The New Climate Wars. So there's a symposium you can participate in tomorrow evening. And again, links to register for that are on our website and on the Facebook event. Thursday, Fresh Ways with Balcony Gardens. That is obviously not a balcony. That's a picture of my potatoes in a burlap sack, but that's the best I could do. That one's at 6:30. So we're trying to share the events around the day because I'm sure that there were people that would have liked to come today that couldn't because of working and other things. And then Friday, we've got Reclaiming Biodiversity for Pollinator Protection. I'm really excited for that one. Again, a Seeds of Diversity presentation. Saturday, I'm really excited for Saturday. Saturday, we're doing a thing called CD Chatter Day, where we're going to just have a chat like this with different breakout rooms. So people can come, they can offer to host a breakout room or they can join a breakout room that they're interested in. So I think we're probably going to have like 6 or so breakout rooms, and it can be, maybe Amber wants to host one about edible flowers or something else that she's interested in. I think I'm going to talk about germinating seeds and seed starting and timing in a room. So I don't know what I'll call that, but whatever. But if you're interested, you can contact us or even put it in the chat right now if you want to host a room. I think that's going to be fun. That's at 4. And then on Sunday, the last day of the week is The Earth is Our Provider, Grocery Store, Pharmacy, and Hospital, which is like an Indigenous perspective on gardening with Adrian Jacobs. And then we're going to do a wrap up. So feel free to join. All of those links are in the Facebook event and on our website. I don't think I have any more slides. Nope, that's the end of the slides, so I'll stop sharing. Yeah, thank you so much for coming, everybody. And thank you, Amber, for taking the time to make such a handsome presentation. It was also very thorough and entertaining. And yeah, for giving us your wisdom and your time today. And if anyone else has any questions or comments or anything, this is your final opportunity before we end the things. But people are, yeah, thanks so much. Great presentation. We got some nice, you can see the chat now, I guess, Amber. Hey.
Yeah, I can see it now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And,
do you want to put your email in the chat? I didn't actually do that.
I was just going to say, I'm going to put, it's just Coderre Flower Farm. And then on Instagram, I'm also, just because it's such an easy visual platform, you can always message me on there as well.
Perfect.
And we should have samples usually the first week of June. We can get our menu going, and we'll hopefully be at the farmers market before then. So yeah.
Perfect. I look forward to that. I can't wait to come to your farm and see the and all the things.
Yes, once the building is, we're getting there.
Awesome. I just put our email or our website in the chat too, if people want to catch that. And as I was saying, I think to Shannon, we're going to post this presentation on the website as soon as I figure out how to do that. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Genevieve.
Have a lovely afternoon and hope to see you in some of the future things this week. Okay, bye. Oh, I'm going to save the chat.